Welcome to the Artefactors Union. I am your host and foreman, Douglas Scoundrels. Today we're going to be doing something a little different because I realize I never really introduced myself or what I'm doing or how I do it, and that might be useful for you if you're curious who I am or if you're wondering how exactly I put models together. So, hi. Douglas Scoundrels is obviously a handle. It's the one I've been using on Facebook for a couple years now because I do a lot of Malifaux. This channel is focused around Malifaux primarily. And there is a Doug Bowman who is also pretty prominent in Malifaux. And when he started getting my mail, I decided that I would go ahead and change up my last name to something that's a little bit more iconic, something more fitting of me. And Scoundrels was pretty good because I run the podcast Steam-Powered Scoundrels. At this point, we are the longest-running Malifaux podcast, and we are just a hot mess of different ideas. Usually you'll see a minis podcast be all about how to play the game, or on a rare occasion maybe like lore or something. We do everything. We just kind of whatever we feel like we'll talk about. We go all the way from gameplay breakdowns on the turn-by-turn basis all the way up to a shipping series where we just talk about people kissing and nothing lewder than that. But anyways, that's what I do, as well as several other things, including this. I run a TikTok. I've got a charity event I run now every year, hopefully. And I do fun stuff with the game as well, including creating my own version of the one model, one player party game, All Out Brawl. Mine's version is called Bonanza Brawl, and it's very fun. But that's my backstory. As far as putting stuff together and that whole thing, the entire basis of this channel, if you're unfamiliar with Malifaux, the game has very gorgeous detailed models, but they are a bit fiddly to put together. This is like an example. This is 3 models, and they're not great as far as number of bits. They're not bad. Malifaux is in 3rd edition at this point, and they've done a concerted effort to make them easier to assemble, but there's still a lot of 2nd edition models rolling around that are pretty difficult, and again, some of the 3rd edition ones are somewhat hard too. Enough that people kind of complain about them on the regular, so I thought I'd do something because one of my few talents I consider to have is assembly, hence the Artefactors Union. So why the name, you may ask? Artifacting in the world of Malifaux is the assembly of constructs and mechanical limbs that require magical things called soul stones to operate, but they can operate for a very long time on those, basically magic batteries. And then Union, because one of the major players in the game of Malifaux is the Arcanists, which are fronted by the Miners and Steamfitters Union, and I am a big fanboy of them, so Artefactors Union. Now, on this channel, I assemble models box by box, just going through the entirety of a singular box. So if you buy a box, you'll be able to put all of the models in that box together with one singular video of mine. I gotta keep it that way because if I do an individual model basis, I'm going to go insane with trying to manage all of that, which is why I've got this pile here, which I can't use because it is the Yedza core box, but Yedza was already assembled. So someday I'll probably get a brand new one and I'll put that together. But anyways, to my supplies, and then maybe we'll get into some techniques here. These are precision tweezers. I usually use them for indicating stuff on the model. I don't use them all that much in assembly, but they still are useful because, one, they're decent pokey sticks. You can definitely use an X-Acto knife for poking things, but also this is the ability to grip things too if you desperately need that. I mentioned the X-Acto knife. There we go. Sharp pokey stick. You definitely need one of these. This is very, very critical for cleaning off flash from your models and poking things. Gotta have yourself some nippers. Good quality ones are very, very important. The cheapo Army Painter ones, not going to cut it. You're going to break bits and send them flying, and the lack of precision means you're either cleaning up way too much or you might start accidentally cutting off parts of the bit. But they're not too terribly hard to find. You might want to look at Gunpla stuff. I'm not sure how prevalent precision nippers are in the mini wargaming community, but I believe these ones were marketed as Gunpla. And lastly, you need to put the models together using plastic, cement. I do not recommend super glue at all whatsoever. It might work for bigger miniatures, but definitely not Malifaux. The bits are too small, and the models are too small and detailed to really allow you to use super glue, which kind of adds a layer, like an actual physical layer of glue between the two bits. This just melts the plastic, and then the two bits kind of melts together, and it's a pretty solid fit, and it works a lot better in this situation. Now, as far as additional stuff, if you want to go that way, I do still have super glue. On rare occasion, I do need super glue, especially for fixing things that are already broken, because sometimes you just need extra support, and the cement's not going to do that for you. Also, I use this for putting things onto bases. Quite often, the models aren't mine. They're gifted to me so I can do assembly videos on them, and therefore I want them to be easily removable from the base, so I will glue them to the base. I also have some lovely Fixer. All Fixer does is make the super glue dry really fast. The bad side of Accelerator, Zip, whatever, is that it makes them more brittle, which is actually what I want. So if I use these two things together, they're going to affix to the base real quick, but they're also going to pop off fairly easily, so you can get to the underside of it when you want to paint, and it's easier to chip that glue off than regular super glue. A few other things, yeah, I would consider the tweezers to be in the maybe category. Very rarely would I suggest this, and this is pretty much to only new assemblers, is yeah, it's expensive. I do not appreciate how expensive it is, but when I started modeling, I was not comfortable wielding an X-Acto blade like I am now, and this thing was extremely helpful in shaving off the flash that I was uncomfortable doing with a sharp knife. So if you are new, I don't mind a mold line remover. I'm pretty sure there's a cheaper version out there. Also, some gap filler. I've got this guy. This was recommended to me by a friend, another person on the podcast. This is a UV activated, I believe. Malifaux doesn't have a lot of really big gaps in their model, so this is rarely used, but it's still used. And I will go ahead and show you a technique for kind of filling in gaps when they're too thin for a gap filler itself. So that's the stuff I use on the regular. If I remember anything, I guess I can come back and record that, but real quick, we'll go over some techniques first, just to pad out this video. Okay, as far as snipping goes, if you weren't aware, there's like a flat side, which you can see here on the bottom, and then there's the not flat side. I don't know what to call that. But anyways, you want to actually put the flat side up against the bit. It might make you slightly anxious that you're going to carve off a piece of the bit, but it doesn't really work like that. As long as both ends of the nippers are up against a piece of the bit, it's just going to cut in a fairly straight line, and you're not going to have a lot of sprue left over to shave off, whereas if you use the other side, one, it's actually harder to see what you're doing half the time, but also you're going to have a large chunk left over. And I'll do both sides on this bit to show you, but also, if you're worried or you have a habit of sending your bits flying off into the carpet never to be found again, there's a pretty easy technique to do that. Now, this is a relatively big bit. I'm not too worried about it, and the precision nippers actually help with not sending it flying across the room because they are sharper. There's less stress that is on the bit before eventually it cuts through, which means it pops less. It's another reason to use the precision nippers. But if this was here, we'll do that first one. This was my last snip, and I was afraid that things were going to go across the room. So here, we'll do it the wrong way too. You just take, you've got one hand on the nippers, which are holding the bit. You could actually snip it right now with your hand, and now we're going to use this hand. We're going to use this one with our thumb and forefinger. We're just going to hold on to the bit. Done. It's not going anywhere. There are smaller ones, which you might be a little less comfortable doing, but another thing that's good about using the flat side is if you have to, for some reason, put your fingers up against the nippers. One, you can squeeze very slowly and make sure that you don't feel any sort of pinch. But two, since you got the flat side, you can pretty easily tell if your flesh is getting squeezed between it fairly quickly. So just go at your own pace, do what you're comfortable with, but that is a very quick and easy way to make sure you don't lose bits. I still do because I'm kind of clumsy at times. And this is the side that we snipped with the flat of the nippers, and this considerably larger chunk is the not flat side of the nipper. So there you go. That's how you're supposed to do that. On to trimming. This is where you gotta work on your knife play and be careful. I've been doing this for a long enough time. I am really confident with this, but I realize that some people are very uncomfortable with knives, and so you gotta be careful. And actually, the best way to make sure that you don't accidentally poke yourself is to have plenty of spare blades. You want this thing to be pretty sharp, because if it's not sharp, it's going to catch, and you're going to need to put more pressure on whatever you're shaving off to actually cut it, which means when that pressure is finally released, the blade's going to go further, just because of momentum and all that. So you want it to be pretty sharp so you don't have to... You have less chance of cutting yourself. This blade is not, sadly. But it's not too bad. I don't have to really worry about cutting myself as long as I don't slide that or stab myself. I'm not going to bleed. Now, as far as cleaning, and again, another safety tip, is you're always going to have your thumb on the back of this thing. And that is when you can put more pressure on it without having too much follow through on it. So you see here, let's say my wrist is at like a 90-degree angle. I'm just going to shoot it forward as far as possible. See, that's a bit of an arc. But if I choke down on it, it goes a lot farther. Which means you have a larger range of motion of accidentally poking yourself. So, always put that back on there. And a lot of your motion is actually going to be between your wrists, which you have a decent amount of control on. You're less likely to go forward. So right now, putting weight on my wrist and also pressing my thumbs together so slightly, and just, you can chip stuff off, run the blade along the actual surface of the bit. You'll eventually get that off. Again, pretty dull blade, so that normally wouldn't take as many slices. But yeah, make sure it's sharp. Thumb in the back. Try to think if there's anything else as far as trimming goes. When you have like mold lines and you don't have a mold line remover, back of the blade is fine. That's going to take a few more scrapes. If it's just a long, thin line, actually, you can use the actual sharp part. It tends to glide better and catch more of it, but just be confident in your abilities, because you can also snag the actual bit and start carving it out. So whatever you're comfortable with, the backside will just take more scrapes. That's all. Now, as far as cement goes, you rarely need to do both sides of the bit. I almost always glue on what would be like the interior, the crevice, corners, the thing that has more surface area, really, and dips to hold the plastic cement. So in this case would be Mikhail's crotch versus the actual bit. Let's lie around here somewhere, this guy. Yep. And you want to be relatively quick after you put it on, because it starts curing and right away, and the longer you take to put it on, the less good of a bond you're going to have. So we can talk about gap filling, I think. I dry fitted this earlier, and it has a bit of a gap on the thigh. Nothing bad. Normally I leave the gaps when I'm doing assembly videos, because it's easier to see, so a person has a better reference of what it's supposed to look like and where the connection is. But if you want to do a little bit of gap filling, you can still do it with your plastic cement. Here, I'll go and do that dry fit and show you. It's not a perfect technique, but it's just going to be better than what you normally have. You can kind of see there's the gap there on the thigh. Yep. Let's see if I can do this. As far as terminology goes, I'm really bad with my words. So anytime it's this surface that's obviously supposed to connect to another bit, I refer to that as the connection point on both sides. And then stuff like this will be like a divot or a hole or a dent or whatever. And then the opposite of that, the part that's usually sticking up out of a bit. So like here you can see this part that's sticking up. I refer to that as a tooth. I'm not sure why, I just like it that way. So if you're always confused what I mean by that in videos, and that's what I'm trying to say. Alright, now back to the gap filling. Okay, plastic cement is on. Try to do this on camera. That's pretty good. And you can still see the gap there, but if you can do this while it's curing for the first time, you want to just wiggle it ever so slightly. What you're doing is that you're sort of building up a buffer of melted plastic between the two bits, and that is semi-liquid, so if you rub it around just enough and then squish it back into place, it should do a bit of that gap filling for you. Yeah, that looks good. You might need a little bit of shaving afterwards, but it's pretty safe. And if you forget to or didn't realize there was a gap before you glued it together, as long as it's still like within the first few minutes of curing, you actually can just go over it with cement. Like I could do this right now, and then do more of the wiggling. If you can't like actually pull it out and squish it back into place, just squeezing it over and over again will build a bit of that layer of melted plastic and do a decent job of filling that gap. Okay, do I have anything else to talk about? Alright, as far as when you use cement on both parts of the bits, that's just really thin connections. That's just to make sure that both get enough cement on them to start melting, and that way both sides can really fuse to each other. That's really the only time I see you using it. If you are having a real rough time getting them to stick together, also do it. Then sometimes the surface, the connection points don't touch in that many places. In which case, yeah, do both and see if they'll glue. Also, alternatively, if you feel like being adventurous, if it's creating a big gap to a point where like the squishing doesn't help or there's obviously something in the way, what you can do is rip the bit off. And another good thing about the cement is that when you rip the bit off, you'll be able to tell exactly where, oh goodness, it connects to the other part of the model. You can see it's connecting in most spots for this bit, so not really a good example, but I'm not going to put a bunch of models together to find that something to give you a good example of. But if you want to close gaps another way, after you rip it off, you can actually go through and find all the parts where it is actually connected and shave those down, because that's the part that is actually touching the other part of the bit, and if you shave it down, it means that the area around it is also then going to be touching the model. So you're increasing the surface area it's connected to and usually closing gaps that way as well. So just a little bit of shaving, go slowly. You might have to glue it in again and rip it off again. Take your time. You can defeat most gaps pretty easily. Now, one last thing I remembered, going back to trimming bits, there is the case of like small thin things and getting snapped. What I personally do is that this is probably still too thick for this example, but we'll pretend this is a piece of rope. There's ropes and malifaux, and what I normally do is the part that's attached to the rope, if it's a bit containing several things including the rope, I go for the one that's attached to the rope first. I feel like it's more dangerous to do it at the end, but that's more of my opinion. I can't give you a science reason behind it. But as we were doing before, holding on to the bit, instead of like grabbing with our fingers, we're going to put counter pressure against it with my middle finger in this case. And that way, your finger is going to be taking on some of that stress that happens when you snip. And it's much less likely for that bit to snap in half when you're trimming it. Also, again, the sharp nippers, will cause that less often. Okay, I think that's all I have. That ended up being a bit more of a ramble than I was expecting it to be, but hey, now you know who I am, what I do, why I'm doing it, and a few techniques that might be useful for assembling models. I'm not the best painter out there, but I would consider myself one of the better assemblers, and I really enjoy doing this, so I'm happy to help you out, happy to help out the malifaux community. Just please, I enjoy the positive feedback and let other people know that I exist. I'm always taking donations for models. If I have not built it, if it's not in my backlog or already made into a video, I will do it for free. Just ship it to me. I'll ship it back to you. I'll pay for the shipping back to you as well. Because I would eventually like to get all the models done. And with 2 kids, I can't really afford to buy all the models in Malifaux. So if you feel like helping me out, let me know. Otherwise, just feedback again, really useful, and spread the word. Thank you. But yeah, my send off. I have to have a send off with everything, including the podcasts. I don't know why. But this send off is I have been your foreman, Douglas Scoundrels, helping you build a better Malifaux. That sounds nice, right?